could shake the laws of an entire galaxy. On the edge of deep space, a mining crew hears a desperate cry for help from a dying alien race with freezing children aboard a shattered ship. Protocol says turn them away, but humanity says something else. This is a story about courage, compassion, and the choice to do what's right, no matter the cost. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe to the channel and show a thumbs up by liking the video. Now let's move toward this wonderful and unforgettable story. Captain Nolan Thorne stood by the window of Echo Spire, a mining station floating quietly on the edge of known space. The stars blinked outside like distant lanterns, steady and silent. It had been a normal morning, slow and uneventful, until the alarm cut through the air like a blade. The shrill sound echoed through the station's halls, waking it up like a heartbeat skipping a beat. Nolan dropped his mug, the ceramic shattering against the floor, and rushed toward the command deck. His boots thudded against the metal floor as he made his way through the long, winding corridors. Echo Spire had been his home for 4 years. It wasn't glamorous, mostly drills, dust, and isolation, but it was steady. Safe. That alarm meant something had shattered that safety. Inside, the control room, Dr. Layla Rios was already at the main console. Her brows were furrowed, her fingers flying across the keys. "Something's out there," she said as Nolan entered. "It's not from our sector. I picked up a signal, faint, broken, but definitely not random noise." "What kind of signal?" Nolan asked, sliding into his seat. Layla tapped a few buttons and a series of strange sounds filled the room. Static mixed with what sounded like a voice, distorted, fragmented. Then clearer, trembling words broke through. "Please, warmth, dying, children, help." The voice didn't sound human, but it didn't have to. Pain, fear, and desperation were things that didn't need translation. Nolan felt a chill crawl up his spine. He'd heard distress signals before. Most were technical, ships requesting repairs, assistance with navigation, or fuel. But this was different. This was the sound of someone who had nothing left to lose. He looked at Layla. "Where's it coming from?" She pulled up a map on the screen. Roughly 12 clicks out, drifting in slowly. "I've rerouted external cams." The feed clicked on. At first, it was just shadows against the stars. Then a shape emerged. A ship, if it could still be called that. Burn marks scarred its surface. Pieces of metal floated around it like a trail, and one of the engines looked half torn off. It was more ghost than vessel, dragging itself through the void. Nolan leaned closer to the screen. "That thing shouldn't even be flying." "I don't think it is," Layla said softly. "It's coasting." More team members arrived. Isha, Patel, the young engineer with a quick mind and quicker opinions, Malik Jones from logistics, always the first to doubt anything out of protocol. The signal repeated, a little clearer now. The voice was shaking. "We seek the warmth bringers. Children cold. Please, help." Aisha's voice cracked the silence. "That doesn't sound like pirates or smugglers. That sounds like someone dying." Malik frowned. "And we're not a rescue team. We've got 50 people max and rations for maybe 2 weeks extra. What happens if we bring them aboard and they're hostile?" Nolan didn't respond right. Away. He watched the ship limp forward. The image zoomed in, revealing what looked like cracks in the hull, vents leaking vapor, and movement. Small, barely visible figures inside, huddled in the corners. He keyed the station-wide comms. "Everyone stand by, we may be receiving unplanned visitors. This is a full crew alert. Be ready." Layla turned to him. "You're really going to let them dock?" Nolan nodded slowly. "If that were us out there, I'd hope someone would open the door." Within minutes, the docking bay came alive. Emergency teams suited up. Tools clanked against metal. A red light blinked above the airlock as the damaged ship finally made contact. There was a long, hissing pause as the doors, aligned and opened. Cold hit first, a wave of freezing air that pushed into the station like a winter storm. Then the figures appeared. They were tall, lean beings covered in dull, scale-like skin that may have once shimmered but was now pale, almost gray. Their eyes were large, black, reflecting every light in the room. Behind them came smaller figures, children. They clung to the adults, too weak to stand upright. Their movements were slow, fragile like leaves drifting in water. Nolan stepped forward. "I'm Captain Nolan Thorne. You've reached Echo Spire Station. You're safe now." The tallest figure, perhaps a leader, stepped forward. Its voice was the same from the transmission, though stronger now, closer. "I am Eliar, guardian of my people. We seek warmth. We seek life. Our young cannot survive another cycle." Malik whispered behind Nolan. "This is breaking every regulation in the book." Nolan didn't turn. He kept his eyes on Eliar. "Regulations. Don't breathe. Children do." For a long moment, nothing moved. Then one of the alien children stepped forward, eyes fluttering shut, and collapsed into the arms of an adult. That was all it took. "Get them to medical," Nolan ordered. "Isha, redirect the heat lines to the lower decks. Layla, alert the food lab. We'll need every bit of nutrition we can synthesize." As the aliens were led slowly into the station, Nolan stood still, watching them pass. They had arrived as ghosts of something ancient and forgotten. But here, in the warmth of a forgotten mining station, perhaps they could live again. Far above, the stars blinked, silent as ever. But deep inside Echo Spire, the silence had been broken by something new. Hope. The air inside Echo Spire remained cold long after the docking bay doors had shut. Engineers rushed to seal the gaps and reroute heating, but the chill from the alien vessel seemed to linger like it had soaked into the walls. Captain Nolan Thorne walked slowly through the corridor, watching the newcomers carefully. The Carthari, as they called themselves, moved with quiet dignity despite their clear exhaustion. Their long limbs shook slightly with every step, and their eyes, large, dark, and full of emotion, flicked from face to face, unsure of what kind of welcome they were receiving. The one called Eliar stayed near the front. He was older, maybe a leader, but not because he demanded attention. It was in the way the others glanced at him for reassurance even while they tried to remain calm. Nolan kept his voice low and steady as he walked beside him. "We're setting up a warm section for you in the East Wing. It's not fancy, but it'll keep you alive." Eliar nodded slowly. "Warmth is life. For the young, especially." He turned slightly and looked back at the smallest members of his group. There were at least a dozen Carthari children, their tiny bodies wrapped in cloths that did little to fight the cold. One little one, barely up to Nolan's waist, kept stumbling, catching herself on an adult's leg. Nolan's heart ached at the sight, but he kept moving. They reached the eastern section, which had been cleared of mining equipment and filled with emergency blankets, heaters, and anything else the crew could spare. A soft hum filled the air, the sound of heaters working. At full capacity, Dr. Layla Rios and Isha Patel were already inside, helping set up temporary beds. Layla looked up as the group entered. "Temperature's rising, but slowly. We're at 9 degrees Celsius. It's not ideal, but it'll have to do for now." Eliar walked into the room, his breath no longer visible in the air. He placed a hand on one of the heaters, then turned to the others and spoke in his own language, a series of soft, melodic sounds. The Carthari began to settle, curling up on mats or simply lying down near the heat sources. One of the children, a girl named Tovi, was still shaking. Layla crouched next to her and offered a thermal wrap. Tovi looked up with half-closed eyes and reached out, her small hand brushing Layla's wrist. Her skin was rough and cold, like icy stone. "She needs help fast," Layla whispered to Nolan. "Her temperature's dropping too quickly. If we don't get her stabilized, she won't last the night." "We'll do what we can," Nolan replied. He turned to Aisha. "Can you boost heat to this wing? Pull from the greenhouse if you have to." Isha nodded without hesitation. "We're not growing tomatoes if it means saving lives." Malik Jones entered the room then, his face grim. "Command's going to have a fit when they hear about this. We're breaking at least 5 major rules just by letting them dock." Nolan didn't look at him. "I'm aware. We barely have enough for our own crew," Malik added. "Food, heat, oxygen. What happens when we run out?" We make it work, Nolan said simply. Because we're human, and we don't let children freeze to death in our corridors. Malik said nothing more. He turned and walked out, shaking his head, but he didn't argue again. Hours passed. The Karthari remained quiet, almost too quiet. Even the children didn't cry. They simply huddled together, watching the humans with wide, unsure eyes. Eliar stayed near Tovi, who now lay under 3 layers of heat wraps, her breathing shallow but steady. Layla checked her vitals every 20 minutes, refusing to leave her side. That night, a strange moment of peace settled over the station. In the common area, a few crew members sat together, talking softly. Isha and one of the Karthari adults named Ven traded words in a mix of gestures and simple phrases. Ven was a curious one, pointing at tools, light fixtures, even the floor panels, trying to understand how the station worked. Isha laughed more than once, trying to explain things. Why do I feel like we're the aliens, she joked. Nolan watched from a distance, arms crossed. He'd expected resistance, fear, maybe even panic. But instead, the crew had stepped up. They were tired, worried, even scared, but they helped. Not because they had to, because it was right. Later, Nolan sat with Eliar by a heater, sharing hot water mixed with nutrient packs. The Karthari elder sipped it slowly, his eyes distant. We traveled far, Eliar said quietly. Every world we found turned us away. They saw our hunger and our numbers and thought we were dangerous. Too much trouble. You're not, Nolan replied. You're people. That's all I need to know. Eliar glanced at him, a faint shimmer returning to his dull scales. You are unlike the others. You listened. I just did what anyone should do, Nolan said. Eliar looked at the heater, then at his people. You gave us warmth. That means more than you know. As Nolan rose to leave, Tovi stirred on her mat. Her eyes opened slowly, and for the first time she reached out, not in fear, but curiosity. She touched Layla's coat, and a quiet sound, almost like a purr, came from her throat. She was going to survive, and Nolan knew, deep down, this was only the beginning. 2 days after the Karthari arrived, Echo Spire felt like a different place. The East Wing, once filled with dust and unused equipment, now buzzed with quiet energy. The Karthari were recovering, especially the children. Their color was slowly returning and their movements were no longer heavy with exhaustion. But outside the warmth of that wing, tension was building. Captain Nolan Thorne knew it couldn't last forever. He was in the control room when the call came through. The screen lit up with the seal of the Earth Colonial Council, followed by the face of Director Kalden Shaw. The man's expression was cold and unreadable, like someone used to delivering orders without questions. Captain Thorne, Shaw began, his voice smooth and sharp at the same time. We've received reports of unsanctioned alien contact at Echo Spire. Is this accurate? Nolan stood tall. Yes, sir. 41 Karthari survivors. Their ship was failing. We gave them shelter. Shaw didn't blink. You understand that such action violates interplanetary safety laws and refugee protocol. You were not authorized to make contact, much less bring them aboard. With respect, Director, Nolan replied. They were dying. There was no time to wait for approval. Shaw leaned forward slightly, his tone colder now. This is not a rescue ship. Your station is not equipped to house unknown species. You will prepare the Karthari for immediate transfer to Processing Center Delta. A transport ship will arrive in 72 hours. Nolan said nothing at first. The silence between them stretched. Then calmly, he answered, I won't do that. Shaw narrowed his eyes. Excuse me? These people aren't threats. They're refugees. Sending them to Delta means sending them back into the cold and death. I can't allow that. Shaw's voice tightened. This is not a suggestion, Captain. Disobeying a direct order will cost you your commission and possibly more. I understand, Nolan said quietly. The screen went black. For a moment, the room felt heavier. Nolan stared at the monitor long after Shaw had disappeared, knowing that a storm was coming. He had just drawn a line that couldn't be erased. Later that day, the crew gathered in the common area. Nolan stood at the front with Layla, Aisha, and Malik by his side. The mood was serious, but no one looked afraid, only determined. "I won't sugarcoat it," Nolan began. "Command wants the Carthari gone. They're sending a ship to take them to Delta. If we don't follow that order, we could lose this station. We could be labeled as traitors." Murmurs passed through the group. A few heads lowered. But then Aisha stepped forward. "I don't care what they call us. If sending those people away means letting them die, then we're not the ones in the wrong." Layla nodded. "They're healing now. The children are smiling. That wouldn't happen in a freezing refugee center. It wouldn't happen anywhere else but here." Even Malik, who had been against the idea from the beginning, raised his voice. "I don't like breaking rules, but sometimes rules need to bend for the sake of decency." The crew voted. Every hand went up. Later that evening, Renji, one of the Carthari scholars, approached Nolan in the observation deck. He had learned enough human language to speak clearly. "You are taking a great risk for us," he said. Nolan looked out at the stars. "You deserve better than what the galaxy has given you." Renji paused, then said something Nolan didn't expect. "Before our world died, we traveled to many star systems. We warned planets of dying suns, helped them escape disasters. We saved entire civilizations." Nolan turned to him, surprised. "Why didn't anyone help you in return?" Renji's eyes dimmed. "Because we were different. Too different. When our own sun fell, no one came." Something inside Nolan twisted at those words. They had given everything, and when they needed help, they had been turned away. He looked at Renji with new understanding. "That ends here." Juno Vega, the station's communications officer, had been quietly working behind the scenes. Inspired by the crew's vote, she sent encrypted messages to nearby human colonies, explaining what had happened. She told the story simply. A stranded people, children on the brink, and one station that said yes when everyone else said no. The response was overwhelming. Within hours, messages came back, some from mining colonies, others from transport hubs, and even a few from private settlements. A message from the small colony of Marin's Reach read, "We declare ourselves a sanctuary. Any Carthari who need shelter are welcome here." More followed. Even stranger messages came from non-human civilizations. A peaceful trade alliance offered supplies. A medical organization promised assistance. And from the planet Halira, a message read, "The B, humans of Echospire remind us of what hope looks like. We stand with them." Nolan sat in his quarters late that night reading the growing list of supporters. He felt something shift. This wasn't just about one act of kindness anymore. It was bigger than that. Echospire had become a symbol. The next morning, Layla rushed into the control room, eyes wide. "You need to see this," she said. She pulled up a video feed. The Carthari children were outside the medbay playing, laughing. One of them, Tovi, was running in circles, her once pale scales now bright with gold and green. "They're healing," Layla said. "Really healing. I did some scans. It's not just heat. It's safety. They're finally feeling safe." Nolan watched, speechless. The decision they made had already saved lives. Now, it was echoing beyond the station walls. The news came at dawn, when most of the station was still quiet. A soft chime echoed through Echospire's hallways as the main monitor lit up in the command room. Captain Nolan Thorne entered, still rubbing sleep from his eyes, and stood silently as the message began. The face on the screen was familiar. Commander Idris Vale, a senior officer from Earth's defense fleet. He was calm, his tone measured, but the message was clear. "We are arriving in 12 hours. You will comply with the order to transfer. The Carthari. Further defiance will be considered a breach of interplanetary law." Nolan didn't reply right away. He turned off the screen and sat in his chair, staring at the stars beyond the station window. The day had come. They had hoped support from other colonies would buy them time. It had, but not enough. Now Earth was sending a fleet, not just a transport ship. It was their way of reminding everyone who still made the rules. But Nolan wasn't. The same man who had followed every rule without question. Not anymore. The Carthari had changed him just as the station had changed in the last few days. Where there had once been silence and routine, there was now laughter, conversation, even music. The children played in the hallways, their scales bright again, their steps full of life. The adults had begun helping the crew, learning human systems, fixing broken equipment, even sharing meals. They were no longer guests. They were part of Echo Spire. Later that morning, the crew gathered in the common area. Layla, Aisha, Malik, Juno, and others stood around Nolan as he addressed them. We knew this day might come. The fleet is on its way. They expect us to hand over the Carthari. Juno folded her arms. And if we don't? They might shut us down, Nolan said. Or worse. But I didn't bring them here to send them back out to die. And I don't think any of you did either. Isha nodded. Then we stand together. We make it clear. They're not just passengers. They live, here now. Malik, once the voice of caution, now spoke with firm conviction. We've already broken the rules, let's make it count. As they spoke, Eliar, the Carthari elder, entered with Renji and young Tovi at his side. The small girl no longer needed help walking. She stood tall beside her guardian, eyes curious, not afraid. Eliar listened to the humans, and then stepped forward. My people have discussed this moment. We have something to offer, not in payment but as thanks. He placed a small device on the table. It glowed with soft blue light. This, Renji explained, is the key to our legacy. It holds knowledge from thousands of years of studying stars, how to read them, how to stabilize them, how to prevent their collapse. Layla stared at the device, her voice barely a whisper. This could save whole planets. Eliar nodded. It has. We only ever shared it with those who understood what it means to protect life. Now we give it to you. The room fell silent. Nolan picked up the device gently. Why us? Eliar looked around, then answered, because when we were cold and forgotten, you gave us warmth. And that is what keeps stars burning. Compassion, not control. As the fleet approached, more messages began arriving. A colony on the edge of the rim broadcast live support. Echo Spire speaks for humanity, they said, and we stand with them. Civilian ships pledged resources. Independent scientists offered to study the Carthari's technology. Even a few alien worlds, ones the Council had long ignored, sent messages of alliance. When Commander Vale's fleet finally arrived, they didn't come with weapons raised. They paused, waiting. Nolan took a deep breath and opened a channel. This is Captain Nolan Thorne of Echo Spire. The Carthari are no longer refugees. They are part of our crew, our home. If you choose to take action against us, know that you're not just silencing a few miners on the edge of space. You're standing against everyone who believes in something better. The screen stayed blank for a long moment. Then Commander Vale's face appeared. He looked tired, not angry, not cold, just weary. I've read the transmissions, I've seen the support, and I've seen the data on your guests. He paused. You've created something unexpected here. Something right. Nolan waited, tense. Vale continued. Earth Command is officially recognizing Echo Spire as a sanctuary zone. No enforcement will take place. You are to continue humanitarian assistance and share your findings with allied worlds. Around the station, cheers erupted. Layla hugged Aisha. Malik let out a long breath. Juno burst into tears. Even Eliar smiled. A slow, peaceful smile that said more than words ever could. That evening, Nolan found himself once again in the observation deck. Tovi stood beside him, holding a small carved object. It was a star, made from the polished crystal of their damaged ship. She offered it to him. For warmth, she said simply. He accepted it, speechless. Stars filled the view beyond the window, each one a reminder of the lives they had saved, the bridges they had built. Echo Spire was no longer just a mining station. It was a symbol of what humanity could be when it chose hope over fear. And in that quiet, glowing place between stars, something new had begun.